Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. Alright, okay. Let's continue this. We're working our way towards the coming storm as it will break forth soon. Recently, just off camera because it's sort of boring, went through and Arthur Bomber Harris is put him as in charge of RAF Bomber Command, renamed this Air Wing BC Bomber Command Air Wing, and attached all my bombers to it, partially for historical reasons, but it was also because I know the historical pattern is why I also set up Germany's this way is for my personal management, so I can just go to click the air wing, find all my bombers, at least all the ones in Britain here. RAF Fighter Command, similar thing, renamed the one air wing FC for Fighter Command, and that's not the right, oh no, yeah, up here under Hugh Downing, the rather good leader of Fighter Command during the war, and those two I knew. This one I looked up. I presume he's Huguenot. Okay, quickly. Huguenots were French Protestants back Louis the 14th? No. Louis the 13th? Maybe Louis the 14th. I don't remember. That with the Edict of Nantes, which was a toleration, I believe, I hope I don't get this all wrong, in France of toleration of Protestants within it got revoked, and there was a bunch of massacres of Protestants. Others were sort of let go and others just escaped. Most went to Britain. Some went up to the Netherlands, I think. And so you get a lot of very old British families that have very French sounding names, and they never dropped their names as they slowly integrated into the society. And so they are known as Huguenots, so they're as loyal as anything and English as anything. They basically retain zero of their French cultural heritage, other than, and they all gave up their, basically, I think almost entirely, gave up their Huguenot, and I don't know the details of it, Protestant belief system, and adopted the Church of England as, at least over time. I'm not saying all the ones that showed up, I'm not saying they changed their belief system, but their children or grandchildren or whatever just adopted the standard English belief system, Church of England, or one of the dissenting churches. But there's, my knowledge, no Huguenot church. So that's sort of, you get these very French sounding names. They're not like, oh, I had a French father or anything like that. They're English as English can be. And they're also very English in the sense that they are like a lot of immigrants to the United States. Not, well, a lot of them aren't anymore, but a lot of them wanted to very much be super Americans, not just bring their own culture and be their own self. They wanted to be more American than the Americans. That's sort of how a lot of them are very loyal to Britain, and they were sort of also the last significant wave of French cultural migration into Britain, or the previous one, significant one, of course, were the Normans, and before that you would have to go to either Roman migration up or Gaelic migration around. So, but that's the Huguenots, in case you didn't know. Yeah, I know a lot of you have played Europe or Universalis, but I've looked at that period. But that's, so Jobert de la Frit, I don't know. I had to look him up to find out who was Coastal Command, or one of the Coastal Command leaders. So the other two I didn't know. Okay, cold oil conversion. So we want to stop that. Still just those two, which we're letting go for the moment. And I've also done a little reorganization down here, sort of creating the Western Desert Force to be ready to handle the Italians, because I'm sending them just to here because this is plains and not desert, so we don't face desert attrition while we're waiting. But as we get nearer to the war, I want to move over here and to see if we can, instead of waiting for the Italian attack, to see what we can gobble up early in the war. We'll see. May not be a good idea. Again, if you played this a bunch and have suggestions, because I'm going mostly off of my history and obviously to counter what I do or see as playing as Germany. Okay. We can now construct radar stations. That's good. Fighter ground control doctrine. Radar training naval doctrine. Let's look at those two, see if those two are the right. Yeah, that's good, and radar training, that's a little bit more ahead. So we will now, since we have time, and hopefully we can let this roll. Radar was kept a very big secret by the British, but obviously people knew about it because there were something sort of like this, big tower installations around the country. And the Germans definitely knew of their existence. If you watched my last series, they actually sent the Graf Zeppelin II. That was the second Graf Zeppelin, not the Graf Zeppelin aircraft carrier, the Graf Zeppelin II, along the British coast here, trying to pick up the radar signals and identify them to see what they were, to be able to counteract them or just study them more. Didn't really do very good because they didn't turn off their radio transmitters or something correctly. I forget the details, but they definitely were doing spy missions prior to the war, trying to observe British radar and understand what it was doing and how it worked. They understood, I think, the basic concept that it was a fighter detection, or aircraft detection, I guess would be more appropriate. Okay, infiltration tactics, we'll let that one go. Equipment. But while this was going on, and at this period, 36 through 39, they're still around, and somewhere down here they made huge sort of concrete geometric shapes, and if you still go into like a certain place and stand in the middle of them, you can hear sounds way off in there. So they were trying to collect like engine sounds that they were doing tests to, and they would fly aircraft in front of them, you know, a mile away, 5 miles away, 10 miles away, or whatever, and do these studies. And I watched a documentary on these a few years ago, somewhere around here in Britain, and they're still there, or at least most of them are. And they were looking at building sort of fixed installations to be able to pick up, you know, aircraft sounds at long range. It was a whole acoustics study. They were doing a lot of that. And with the idea, now this is obviously much wider than in historical, so we can click it, and it gets, as you've seen, and I have to keep saying where you've seen it because of things, as you've seen in the World War Wednesdays and the developers diary, they put an extra C ocean thing in there. Just that's all for us to be able to click on things and select ships and other things better. But is the idea is to really pick up noise, because aircraft noise would come off the aircraft hit the water and flow along the water, at least under the right conditions. Probably something like storms would obviously be stormy and windy themselves, and the very rough conditions along the water surface would probably break it up more. But the engine noise would come down, if you're flying high, and then move out very efficiently along the water levels, even mild waves, much better than it would over land. So it would spread out, and they were trying to, and they put money into the study to try to be able to spot, with using sound, incoming bomber or fighter formations or whatever, early enough to be able to scramble and get aircraft up into the air in enough time to be able to do that you can't do over land, because there's so many objects, trees and houses and whatnot, that would absorb the sound. So it would really work out over the ocean. So the British were trying to do this. Now, while they were doing this, they were also building these much more efficient radar systems. Part of it, or a lot of it, I think, was misdirection. The reason they were putting the money into these other things were a misdirection. The person who was doing it was some sound engineer, and some genius sound engineer, I forget his name, was really doing it to study sound and try to help protect Britain, but he didn't necessarily know about radar and what was being done. It depends on the stage of time and how public they were with it, because radar sort of kind of was, if you look at some of the period fiction, was sort of death ray type study stuff, and that's what they were trying to do and talk about study. So there was radar more of a death ray, because they were realizing that radar radio waves going off and bouncing back, and could you make it high intensity like a microwave, which you can. The Japanese studied microwave weapons during World War II, little bit on American POWs, mostly on Chinese POWs and others. I mean, massive human tests where they were cooking people, and literally cooking people with microwaves. War crimes. So don't think it's just the Germans that were doing war crime studies on prisoners of war. We're not just talking about, we didn't have enough food to feed people because everyone was starving, and our lowest priority was the prisoners of war, and there were just so many of them. No, we're talking when you could, of course, cook a cow, or a pig or whatever. You didn't have to cook people, but they were cooking people with microwaves. And the Japanese actually did fairly well with this. Now, if you would talk about a death ray that works at 30 or 40 feet, and you need a couple of big trucks parked there and, stand still while we cook you, soldier, it worked. Not going to work on the battlefield, still hasn't, won't, and I don't think will, but, they were doing death ray type studies. The Japanese, I think, did the most. Maybe the Germans did some more, I don't know. But so that's what they were looking at in the 30s and the interwar period, were some of these radio waves, microwaves, as potentially, in the popular media, as being death rays. What they really were good for, obviously, was picking up incoming aircraft. Now, once the war was started, they had around a big program on both sides, did this of, and you've seen them, big sort of early radio or early phonograph, record player type sound things that don't project sound but pick up sound in a sort of directional, and you see one person wearing earphones, and they would do that to try to scan the skies, and that worked. It worked if they got close enough, and because radar, especially early in the war, wasn't maybe as flexible as to late in the war, it got much more flexible, but early to guide, direct anti-aircraft guns per se, not just shoot straight up in the air, but shoot over here or shoot, and also direct, of course, the searchlights to try to get on the target at night, so that they were using some of that for sort of local immediate targeting of aircraft. But they also set up the whole system with those sort of big ears, if you will, and a huge amount of spotters spread around that would all report in via telephone system, a whole system, similar to, you might have heard about Chenault setting up in China, a similar sort of ground observation system that would report in incoming Japanese flights that the Flying Tigers would then go up and meet. They set up this whole huge, very workable, very elaborate system that was all a completely misdirected thing. You see it a lot in the movies of the time period, both the sort of newsreels and fiction movies set in, made during this time period, because they were trying to convince the Germans, or anybody else, but primarily the Germans, that their main spotting techniques were either these listening posts with these big ears that people had, or it was the home guard, old retired guys, day and night swapping out in all these little posts, that they had these really good little instruments that they would spot it, and they would dial them in and figure out the range and bearing and all this stuff, and they would report all this information in, and it was all collected. And what they did do, it did do a little bit in that they, when they got reliable types and numbers, they would definitely add that out, because normally the early radar, stuff at 38 through like 40, if you will, 41, you just sort of see the sort of general size of a lot of incoming incoming aircraft. But if they were flying in formation, and you wouldn't necessarily know, except for maybe by their altitude or other behavior, whether they were fighters or bombers, but you wouldn't know. But when the spotters would report, oh, there were bombers and this many. Now, of course, that was based on the weather and day and night, and how well they were able to spot and identify and locate, so that they did collect all that information in real time into fighter command particularly. But the primary detection system was the radar, and trying to get them, even as they were sort of forming up formations over France, once that comes in. And I'm sure we'll talk about this a bit more, but that's sort of what the misdirection that was used by Britain, and they put in a lot of resources, a lot of manpower that could have been doing other things. Okay, coal processing. Now we've gotten done with all of our previous coal and steel production. Now I'm slowly, you see here, building a few more factories. But I don't know how much that's going to continue. We need to. And as a few of you pointed out, yes, it is easier for me to, maybe even better for me to improve our bombing, to trade for some of that. But I'm still just sort of worried about all of these being cut. That I'm not worried about, but all the rest I'm being cut once the war starts. And I'm particularly right now worried about this Mediterranean. Quite honestly, I'm almost thinking about if I could somehow arrange to have a local revolt down here to shut down this, so that way all of the stuff that isn't going to the Mediterranean goes around Africa, which does mean a lot more transports, but it does get them out here. But maybe it'll be pathetic enough, and since it won't have me as Germany sending in some subs, might be alright. I don't know. I'm still worried about it though. medium anti-aircraft. And I guess what I'm worried about is not will I be able to keep up, but will I be just making transports, and not making fighters or armored units. Okay, well, yep, we're researching productivity there. That's doing good. Yeah, well, we'll do civil defense. And I know I'm going to need these fighters. And I know I'm going to need some of these ships to protect Britain and control the seas. But I also know I'm going to need a few divisions of... a few good divisions still. And I know I need to upgrade, which we're slowly getting through some of this. Upgrade my out-of-date stuff. Okay, new industrial zones. More icy, effectively. We'll let that go. We're already in August. I want to push through that. Yeah, that's a big worry. That's a worry. Fighter pilot training. Trying to improve our ability. Okay, so I sent these guys down here. I don't know exactly who this is supposed to be, but I'm going to put them under... directly under Middle East Command here. Send the liners back. No, I want them going back. Yeah, who base there? Figured nothing else. That's just an additional port defense unit. Okay, Secretary of Public Information. Nice. Here we are. And also gather China infrastructure project. Yes, cool. So you're all caught up on those. So now we have this. Will be a decent. Gotta find an HQ for that one, but we'll call that. That'll be a decent attack formation on Italy. Okay, agricultural. Well, that will help out our manpower. I hope you're as curious as me, because I guess I'm just so used to playing Germany, which is obviously what I am used to doing, and seeing how little some of the AI does. I want to see how the what needs to be the offensive AI of Germany, how well that goes in Italy. Cast armor. Let's improve light on here. And steel armor casting abilities. Now, an interesting thing, which I don't think we're going to be playing a U.S. game, at least in Hearts of Iron 3. When the war started, and I mean by that roughly the 39 start date, the U.S. was starting to gear up for the war and starting to gear up for war production. If nothing else to, and there was the America First movement, which we can definitely look at it in some elements of it, like I've looked at the general peace activist movement, particularly in the Cold War era, as simply being pro-Soviet types that were trying to disarm America because they were in favor of the Soviet Union or NATO or whoever it might be. Also with that peace movement, there was also some real, and I mean this much more on the general person's viewpoint, fear of nuclear warfare. Okay, that's a big fear. It's not just, oh, well, we're going to be involved in another war somewhere. Are we going to get, everybody nuked? So that's for the people that supported it is a different thing. Similarly with America First, it wanted us to keep America out of the war. It was definitely had elements that didn't see Germany as some great evil monster. Maybe not that they saw them that they were behaving well, invading France and whatnot, but they didn't see it as the evil monster. And so, and a lot of them may have liked Britain and thought Britain was a nice nation particularly. They wanted to keep America out of the war, and it was really popular. It wasn't the same group of, well, there was definitely people allied with it were like the American Silver Legion, which was the biggest, most popular far right-wing organization that was a fascist looking towards Italy organization. It was not an Italian-American focused organization. It was a sort of middle of America, if you will, ethnically or whatever you want to look at that. There's no one ethnicity in the middle of America, but it wasn't a sort of, I don't know, New York City Italian American type organization. No, it was a, generally not. I'm sure there were Italian Americans in it. But it wasn't an ethnically based organization, and that was by far the largest, if you will, pro-Axis group in America. The German-American Bund was primarily focused in and around German Americans, and most of us who are World War II nerds and looked at it see the big Madison Square Garden rally where they had the big picture of George Washington up there with the Nazi flags and whatnot. That was really more of a focus within the German American communities. Very much so. I don't even know if at some of their sort of camps, they were sort of summer camp type things. I don't think they were constantly occupied camps, but they're sort of camps that they would do. I don't even know if you were a National Socialist, because it was a National Socialist, not a fascist movement. If you were a National Socialist that wasn't of German American heritage, if you would even be welcomed at some of those. I just don't know to how widespread welcoming they are. There was also a Tsarist, or White Russian, shall we say, because they weren't Tsar, White Russian National Socialist movement, which obviously a bit wacky, and that was small, and there were other groups, but it was the American Silver Legion, and they supported the America First movement because they were sort of pro the Axis, not so much because they wanted to keep America out of the war. So there was definitely all that going on. But so even if America was going to stay out of the war, there was still the buildup of American industry to support the war and to sell stuff for the war. Yes, some people call it war profiteering. Well, in my opinion, that's BS. It's war profiteering if you are manufacturing a bunch of stuff and you refuse to sell it at a reasonable price to your government or something else like that. That would be war profiteering. Simply making money because there's a war while you're producing something like an artillery. Excuse me, a little bit of hiccups. While you're producing artillery shells, that's normal business. It's more of the are you paying a reasonable price or not for your items as a nation? There was definitely a build-up for this during the war, and we're on casting has made me think about this. When they needed a turret for a tank to supply to the British, the U.S. could not, and the whole United States, and a lot of the, once the war started for the U.S. particularly, they converted primarily, although they built one huge tank factory, they converted primarily railroad engine manufacturing plants over to tank manufacturing plants because they had all the infrastructure to pick up and move heavy objects around inside of the factory. But they could not cast a turret. Literally, there was no casting anywhere in the United States to set up to cast a turret big enough to hold a 75 millimeter gun. They just did not have that ability in the United States to cast a turret that large. So that's why they came up with and the British, the Americans, they want to mostly give their military vehicles M something or other, and M1 rifle, M1 tank. That's how America works primarily. It was the British who liked giving names to things that actually named, at least early on, some of the American hardware. So the early tank was the Lee, and it took a British to call it the general because it was named after General Lee, the Confederate general, was the Lee tank. And so they needed the part of the specification, because it was basically manufactured for the British, was that they wanted a 75 millimeter gun to be able to knock out the German armor, but that had to be mounted down in the hull of the tank with a limited traverse on it, and all they could cast at the time was a turret that would fit the 75 millimeter gun. And so that's what they would do. I mean, yeah, cast a turret, the 37 millimeter gun. 37 millimeter gun was in the turret, and that was a higher velocity for what it could, armor-piercing type round up in the turret. And that was sort of nice. The British did complain about, because it was a small turret, and they wanted some radios to be able to fit up in there. So they made the second model with, if you notice, the big difference is the back of the Lee's turret is sort of it's a round turret, of course, but it's sort of vertical, where the back of the Grant, because then the British renamed the second model the Grant. The early ones they got were Lee's. They just needed anything. The turret ring is the same size, but it sort of sticks out in the back, sort of like a turret basket, but it was internal. It was armored and internal. And that's where they had the radio behind it. That's what became the primary, call it Lee/Grant, because most of them were Grants. And that had the radio up in, or part of the radio element, or some command element up in that turret, more roominess in there. And that was a British demand on the design after it was in production. And it only made a little bit larger, because it wasn't they couldn't make anything a little larger than 37 millimeter. It was just no point in making it any larger than the size they did, because they could not make anything that would fit a 75, just the 37. So that's why they came up with basically the Grant tank that the British needed desperately, and it worked okay for what it was. But so when we're talking about improving, this is just tells you improving steel armor casting capabilities. This was a very real thing. Some of these things, like the coal processing technologies, to me that's just actually a BS. We're giving you something to use this research mechanism to increase coal output. Okay, as opposed to a mechanic. Oh well, we're going to shift more people into physically working in the mine, so more manpower to the mine, or the obviously very brilliant black ice ability to build these things that would increase it. So I look at the coal processing technologies, because I don't know if they really changed during the war period, somehow making coal easier, more efficient from a technical aspect, as opposed to putting more infrastructure in a mine to more efficiently get coal out, or putting more miners in the mine to get more coal out, or some element like that. Now, rare materials refining, there was definitely well, more than there's definitely stuff like going on. But if you look at synthetic rubber and other synthetic processes, that was going on. So that would be very real. And the sort of coal to oil, which is sort of part of the coal to gasoline, really. But that was definitely developing during this time period. So some of these, like I say, some of these things are very much that a nation had to invest leadership, if you will, research, thinking manpower, developing new techniques and plants and expanding them, that were very real. So some of it is just BS game mechanics that we live with, because at least at the time that didn't come up with better stuff, and this is again why Black Ice is so brilliant. So whenever you hear me criticize something on Black Ice, really got to remember, understand, I think it's brilliant. I think you guys have done a brilliant job, just I don't 100% agree on everything. So let's see, let's do 22 Bombay. So that's one of the things there, that looking about how during the war there was real improvement in a technological capability setting up in a factory. It's not that the America didn't know how to make a bigger casting, and not that they couldn't, with some sort of sand cast or whatever, make a one-off turret, but it was to make them in a production line that they just didn't have anybody set up to manufacture in a scale operation that would function well, and they just didn't have that, and so they knew how to just build it bigger, but no one had. Okay, Red Air Force Officer Purge. Okay, good. We get to kill off a bunch of Red Air Force pilots. That's good for your plans. Now again, I don't know how much you're looking at a coup prospect from Air Force officers. Yeah, they could bomb the Kremlin, but really, more stupidity. Okay, the Supermarine Spitfire. It was a most excellent fighter. It was, world class at its time. Operational history. Okay, Spitfire achieved legendary status. But I'm looking for oh boy. So I really wish, because I need these things. Oh boy, I'm forgetting that the gentleman who designed the Spitfire, who died to design the Spitfire, because he was having, I believe, cancer or something at the time. But instead of trying to get, or some other disease, instead of trying to be well and live longer, he just kept working at it because he knew how important the Spitfire was. Oh boy, I'm really sort of upset that I can't remember his name. But it was a thing of beauty, and to a point, the wings were designed by him because, to some degree from what I understand, because it looked good or looked right. Not that he just purely went on aesthetics. He understood at least the basics of, or more than the basics of, aerodynamics. And so it was, looked right, but looked right in a beauty sense, but also that beauty is that it was the aerodynamic design and the way the wings just worked. It was just a most excellent fighter. Okay, so did we also gain just no? Yeah. Okay. Well, another squadron. We're going to attach that to. Where is it? Fighter command. There you go. A little ways away from it. But so we have the first Spitfires that we're through our reinforcement. So we'll be adding. And yes, good. And first aid. Yes. Also, I think something else happened as well. First aid. Oh, the tech gain. That's right. Gave us a bonus, which pushed us over the edge. And let's see, we'll also do flying boats. Okay, news and politics. Okay, we're going to lose a bunch of money, but we'll get the new benefit. And artillery flexibility, yes. We're going to let that one go. I like artillery flexibility as a neat. And generally those doctrines, I think, are another area where that, I mean, again, Black Ice Crew has done exceedingly well. Uh-oh, we bumped up a little bit or something, I don't know. So yeah, so our territorial pride is now +3, which we didn't have before. National unity is now 0.2 instead of 0.1. And ruling party support is all the way up at 12%, so that should gain us a lot there. But where Black Ice has done really brilliantly, but another thing is that you can come up with a new battle technique of something, but you have to have the leadership to write manuals, get the manuals out to the people, train the people up, the officers, the NCOs, whoever, in the new tactics, and get all of that organized. That's where that is a really good. Okay, everywhere somebody looks like Jerusalem. Okay, we're gonna make sure we do all of those. Looks like we're gonna move that one there just because it's right on top of us. And we get to attack there. We'll send you after those guys. Okay, well, I guess that's mostly it for the ones that weren't. We'll stop that. Since we killed them, we're going to kill these guys. And I guess we'll let that one go out in a second. But I'd rather get this airport and whatnot back. Put the EIC back under my control instead. Fighting fascism is a social duty, not an antisocial crime. Okay, outlaw the fascist parties. Today, Parliament will consider last week's proposal of outlawing the fascist party made by a member of Parliament known for his liberalism. The tendencies are comment. Our political social specialist that this proposal would fail because too few members really want to limit freedom of speech to this degree. How interesting. Okay, well, don't know if they're going to have... I don't recognize that. I'm guessing that's a modern thing. I think that was a modern thing, but I don't know. The symbol is not antisocial crime. That seems like, of course, that's a swastika sort of hidden there, not a fascisti. Give your support. We'll lose organization, or they'll National Socialist League and the British Union Fascist. We'll lose organizational support. We'll gain some neutrality. We're going to oppose this. Partially I'm doing this on historical reasons because they did outlaw, as we saw earlier, the wearing of political uniforms in Britain, but they didn't outlaw the BFU, the British Union of Fascists, until basically the war had started. They locked up most of the leaders in the BFU and broke up the organization. Now, I would say most of the good chunk of the leaders, and including Mosley, I think was a British patriot, in the sense that I don't think he wanted to betray Britain to the Nazis. Might have wanted to malign with the Nazis, but so long as Britain was going to be bombed by the Nazis, he was on the British side. I'm not saying a patriot isn't a good guy, I mean just that he believed in Britain. And I think most of the members were on Britain's side and not on German side. As we've looked in Third Reich events, how I think to some degree that changes once Germany occupies Britain. I think societies like France were much more divided at this time in their loyalties, in that because of the fracturing in society, the loyalty to the idea, or the, say, unified idea of France really became suspect, in my opinion, for many, not for all or even most, but for many. And so France, they would all claim to still be loyal to it, but it was France of the right or France of the left. And so it was, in a way, party over nationalism, I think, was really starting to happen in a place like France. I don't think on a large scale, maybe I'm misreading it, but I don't think particularly on the right, on the large scale, that you had that. Maybe on the left, I don't know, because on the left you have, if you will, international socialism. That's why sometimes I've different times I've referred to National Socialism here in Germany and international socialism. I'm talking about the communists. And I know a lot of people want to define out socialism as being different from communism. Well, the person who created the term first used, to the best of my knowledge, and people can go look it up, and if you can find good evidence to correct me that if I'm wrong, I would like to know that I'm wrong and be corrected. but the first person to coin and use the term democratic socialist and say that he was a democratic socialist was Vladimir Lenin. He wasn't a communist. He was a democratic socialist until the day that he was in power and could come out of the closet as a communist. Then he came out of the closet as a communist. So if you believe in socialism as Marx and Engels, and then other people have added to it, if you believe in that basic format, you do not believe in nationalism. I forget who it was, a person way back years ago now on the Hearts of Iron Forum was talking a little bit about it, and he was a George Bernard Shaw fan, and was sort of anti-nationalism. Sort of nationalism was bad. Just the fact of nationalism was bad. Internationalism was good, and we needed to have more and more of that. As you can tell from everything I'm of the opposite viewpoint. That nationalists can do very bad things, but that doesn't mean nationalism is bad. And that's sort of taken in a negative context, maybe patriotism, if you will, in a positive context. But if you are a general believing socialist of one format or another, you generally believe that nationalism and state identity and national identity are in of themselves a bad thing. This is, talking about Brexit, the British exit out of the European Union. Well, if you are a socialist, you believe in the withering away of the state and of nationalism. So you, of course, believe in the EU, and you want to do the WU, the World Union, that kind of thing. And that's how your viewpoint. So on the left, I see much more of a withering away of the nationalist identity and likely potential to betray your nation because you don't believe in the concept of the nation as a good thing. You might believe in the people and a lot of other things, but you don't believe in the nation as a state. You are an internationalist. On the right, it's different. That's why that is partly comes down to also the economic plans of National Socialists are different than international socialists. But even if they had the same economic plans, even if they did, they don't, but even if they did, the big difference with Hitler was he was a nationalist who was a type of socialist compared to the international socialists. So that varies a bit. But from my analysis, and again it's limited, it's not as in-depth as some other areas, most of the right-wing elements, more with the BFU than, in my opinion, than the National Socialist League or whatnot, because you get Lord Ha-Ha, which was I forget, it was that group or one of the other groups that he was one of the main people. I think it wasn't the National Socialist League. I think it was a different one. Goes to Germany and actively, does the broadcast and helps Germany out. But that's my analysis, that most, and like the right club, they were pro-British elites that were pro the far right, but they weren't anti, or most of them at least weren't the types that want to betray Britain just to see Germany win. So we are going to deny support for it, not because I'm wanting to move in a fascist direction. Okay, we can't do the big demonstrations because we've spent our money, the fleet and the army training, but we'll bring more money back in. You want to hit that new project so that way it sets a timer and clears out, so that when another period comes up and you want it sooner the better, you can potentially get another major a giant infrastructure project or whatever. And as you see, obviously we're talking about World War II, but a lot of the issues that led up to World War II are ones we're still facing today in various aspects. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're pro-EU, armor plate thickness, that you are a communist who wants to destroy Britain. No, it just, you think Britain's standing on its, maybe, but not necessarily. You may just feel, oh, didn't I stop that? I'm trying to stop that. There we go. Let's do the infantry support tank. I know, I've been reluctant. You may be a communist and want to destroy it, but not necessarily, because there's conservative. You just feel being a part of a larger political body makes you stronger. Well, I see it from the American... Oh, that's interesting. I see it from the American perspective of sort of taxation without representation. And Daniel Hannan, I think he's a very good speaker. He's a British member of Parliament for the European Parliament, conservative guy. He's constantly quoting, particularly the Declaration of American Independence, as the reasons why America went independent from Britain, the same reasons Britain should go independent from Europe, in that there's a lack of, and I don't know how much taxation without representation, but I think there's more regulation without representation, and that even the European Parliament members don't get the ability to approve new regulations. So it's governance through bureaucrats. Without it, that is what people are objecting to, I think. So I'm personally in favor of the Brexit, but that's just my viewpoint, and it's the viewpoint of an American who isn't living the situation. I mean, I've lived in Britain in the past. I've traveled there many other times, so I sort of kind of know. I don't know it like a native, not claiming anything like that, but I do sort of kind of know some of the issues. And you know, they're warning over Gibraltar that Spain's going to shut down the border again. Oh well, big deal. They can hold out. They've held out before from Spanish sieges several times, so they'll hold out again. So, and it might make, you know, life more uncomfortable down there for the people. They won't get free access, but you know, if the EU is better set up, more like we've talked about in that before, with an American system in which you have good representation of both the countries and the peoples of those countries, and they had control over the European government, that'd be a different situation. And if it was run better, I could see it, but it isn't run well. So again, some period politics with some modern. This is interesting. They've taken Madrid, so that might mean when the clock runs out that the Republicans will lose. Their capital's in Barcelona, but they've taken the Burgos, the fascist capital, and they've moved their capital down here to Seville instead of, I don't know why they didn't move it to Madrid, but okay, instead of to Madrid. So that'll be an interesting to see if they can move, if they can drive back and get Madrid back before the end. But they're still right now at a balance point. Interesting. It's fun watching Spain. Okay, well, enough for this episode. Thank you for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Do appreciate that. And please post your comments. And I do like to hear dissenting opinions, so long as they're well reasoned and they're civil. So you don't have to be a cheering squad. Tell me why I'm wrong, but tell me that I'm wrong and why. And I do appreciate that. See you next time.